This country is not worth dying for. That's what a friend of mine told me when he heard that I was going to have this opportunity to speak. This country is not worth dying for. I can't say that I disagree. It used to be, no doubt. But my generation currently experiences the United States as a moral wasteland, pillaged by the people and institutions who know how to play the game and exploit the value that's been built over the last 250 years. This country is not worth dying for, but it could be. Now, lest I sound like a communist or a Gen Z defeatist, let me tell you a story. It was June 7th, 1776. A young man named Edward wrote a letter to U.S. founding father John Jay. They were discussing the idea that the colonies should be independent of the crown, and this young man, Edward, hated the idea of declaring independence. In fact, he called the proposed Declaration of Independence the idea of madmen. Edward was a delegate for South Carolina at the upcoming Continental Congress, where there was going to be a vote on a resolution to sever ties with Great Britain. On July 1st, South Carolina voted against the motion. Just like Edward had wanted, they voted against declaring independence. Now, this Edward guy was young. He was 26 years old. He wasn't a particularly good student growing up, but he spoke well, had a fresh law degree that he'd already put to use defending free speech against the crown. So on July 1st, just a few weeks after Edward wrote that letter against independence, South Carolina voted against the Declaration of Independence. But in his desire to create a unanimous front of all 13 colonies, Edward put aside his disagreements on a few finer points and personal preferences and decided it would be best to support the call for independence alongside the other 12 colonies. He spent that night of July 1st persuading his fellow South Carolina delegates to reverse course the next day and vote to approve the resolution of independence, with the formal declaration being adopted 2 days later on July 4th. So why do I share this story of a young man who changed his mind and the minds of a few of his friends to vote for a resolution? If you're well-versed in history, you'll know that this was Edward Rutledge, the youngest signer of the Declaration at 26 years old. Edward's name, along with many others, has largely been lost to memory and persists primarily in documents and dusty novels, yet here is a young man who nearly single-handedly changed the minds of enough people to ensure that all 13 colonies were on board with declaring independence and uniting against the tyranny of this crown. So I share this story because it illustrates what the 26-year-olds of today need to do to ensure their future and our future. 250 years ago, the system was broken. For a couple hundred years prior, it had worked. There were 13 colonies, each successful in its own right, and that would not have been possible without the system. But things changed, and what used to work no longer did. The system no longer worked for the colonists, so people complained, and some of them probably melted into puddles and gave up. And a few of them decided they were willing to stand and be jailed and die for a vision of a new and better system. I'm 28 years old. I own a business with a half dozen employees. I'm married. I have a 7-month-old daughter. I hope to have more kids, and I live in the greatest country in history. And the system in many ways no longer works for me and my generation. So I want to give you a vision of a better system than the one that we're operating in. I speak for my generation. The system that the founders died for is not the system we have today. And today's system is not worth dying for. When the founding fathers decided to create a new system, they did 3 things. They appealed to their God-given rights, they declared specific grievances, 27 or 28 of them, and they rallied around an outcome that they were willing to die for. They appealed to their God-given rights, and those have not changed. If life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness were given by the infinite, eternal, and unchanging God, and they were good enough 250 years ago, they're good enough today. The founders declared specific grievances. Generation X was the last one that could meaningfully buy a house in America. Maybe millennials can, but Gen Z certainly can't, not with the system trending the way it is right now. Multi-billionaires and foreign nationals are buying up swaths of American farmland and water rights to build data centers and squeeze out the American homeowners. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm blessed to own a successful business and have a handful of fantastic employees, and right now, I am watching countless 30, 50, 100-year-old businesses being sold to firms that destroy the culture, lay off Americans in droves, intentionally decrease the value they provide and jack up prices to consumers, and then strip these businesses for parts or sell them up the chain to the next largest private equity firm. And the legislation and lobbying fights to make it harder and harder to challenge these massive conglomerates. I've had the privilege of hiring dozens of people and reading hundreds of resumes. I've never considered a college degree when hiring, because college has gone from a meaningful and useful education in the humanities to a scam designed to separate parents and children from hundreds of thousands of their hard-earned dollars. My generation's experience of America is one where our dollar buys less, our vote counts less, our friends are dying of fentanyl stemming from a root of hopelessness, our jobs are undercut by foreign visas and trash robots, and our prospects of starting a business and buying a home get worse every year. Now, I've got a great life. Many of us do. But in many ways, the system doesn't work for my generation. So when my friend says that this country isn't worth dying for, I understand. But rather than declaring that this country isn't worth dying for anymore, my challenge to myself, my peers, and each of you is to flip the question. That's the third thing the founders did. They found something worth dying for, and they turned the country into that thing. So here's an America worth dying for that will make it to 500 years. Number 1, a country that continues to foster economic innovation and market disruption. This means a joyful and total destruction of lobbying, corporatocracy, and corruption, starting at the local level and moving up. Number 2, a country full of families getting married, having kids, and staying married. The nuclear family is the only way to create children, teach them right and wrong, and protect them from physical and spiritual harm. Number 3, a country that rewards and trains personal sovereignty. We must hoard freedom like gold, guard it with our lives. Those 3 are good: economic freedom, thriving families, and personal sovereignty. Those are rights worth fighting for, but what makes a country worth dying for goes one step deeper. Our rights come from God. The country worth dying for is one that stands united. And a country that stands united must be a moral country, and a moral country is united under God's standard. God makes his standard plain in 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people, who are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land. When we stray from God's law, we will fall. When we follow God's law, we will flourish. Edward Rutledge was a 26-year-old who fought against the Declaration of Independence. He disagreed with the other 12 colonies, but for the sake of something greater, he humbled himself, changed his course, and spent one night convincing the people around him to stand united. And that one night launched 250 years of the greatest country in history. So our challenge is the same one Rutledge had. Humble yourself under God's law, joyfully pursue righteous living, and convince the person next to you to join you. That's how we'll revive a country worth dying for, and that's how we'll get to 500. May God be with us.